Okay, so hello everybody. You've joined our first webinar called Building a Culture of Purpose. Our speaker is Philem Rigginsem. The first part is about 15 to 20 minutes, and after that we'll have half an hour discussion. So maybe Phil, could you please say some words about you and your experience?
Absolutely. So people should go on mute if so that there's no echo, unless they want to say something. But just to give you a sense, I'm a strategist that uses data and listening, whether it's surveys or focus groups or digital analytics, to help the people I work with tell their story better. So I do all different kinds of communications work, mostly helping with narrative development or helping using opinion research for running campaigns. But I have a company called the Brand and Reputation Collective that is a collective of different organizations that are very much focused on how brand and reputation work together. And what I want to share with you today and use to have a conversation is the results of a study I did in collaboration with the European Association of Communication Directors in 2018. And we decided to do the research because there was so much going on in the US in terms of 2016, you had the election of Donald Trump. In the UK, you had Brexit. So there were all, and also the rise of populism, fake news, all kinds of things were going on. And we were just curious to understand how communications professionals were reacting to that. So we did a very deep dive exploration of that, and very qualitative in nature. It started out with 10 in-depth interviews with senior communicators at companies like HSBC Bank, Lenovo, KPN in the Netherlands, Beckhuizer in the UK, as well as the OECD in Paris and the European Union communicators in Brussels, to really first of all, understand how they thought of things and thought about what was going on around us. And then we did 2 roundtable discussions at the European Communication Summit in Berlin in June 2018 to widen out the conversation a little bit. And then finally, we did an online survey in May and August of 2018 with senior communicators across Europe and in some other countries like North America to get a wider perspective. But even then, most of the questions were open-ended. They weren't like yes or no questions. They were much more like, well, what do you think about this? And that's what I want to share with you today, is the results of that and get your reaction to it. I'm very curious to understand if you think what we found in 2018 is still relevant today, given what's going on with COVID-19 and just life today. So the presentation is divided into 4 sections. The first section is looking at what's changed in the world around us. The second is looking at the impact on communicators. The third part is looking at how communicators are adapting to the new reality. And then the 4th short section is looking at a possible way to deal with all of this uncertainty, which we call a culture of purpose. So first, we wanted to understand, with all the changes, how did communications professionals see it? Did they actually think that radical uncertainty was a reality? And how did they define radical uncertainty? So we asked the question, how do you define radical uncertainty? How do you define the time we're going through? And they could say whatever they liked. And 3 things popped out at the top. So uncertainty, the fact that things were very unpredictable today, very ambiguous, truth was hard to tell from fiction, and it made things very difficult for communicators. And I'm going to move this a little bit, hopefully, so you can see the numbers. Okay, so you had 32% who said something related to that, and then nearly as many thought that there had been a loss of trust in traditional institutions and a rejection of traditional elites, so that there was new sources of influence out there. And finally, another really big thing that popped out was this idea of a paradigm shift, that everything that we thought was true needed to be questioned, and we basically had to rethink everything. And you can see it, there are a variety of other things that people thought were going on. Interestingly, that technology was driving a lot of this change, and some of it overwhelming people, some of it leading to loss of trust and other factors. So the next, one second. So the next thing, this is a quote from one of the participants in Italy that sums up how a lot of the people talked about this. So today is a time when nothing can be taken for granted, and you need to rethink everything. Even democracy isn't for granted anymore. For the first time since the Second World War, you have to plan your journey without a compass while traveling uncharted waters. And I think a lot of us may feel like today we have that same sense of traveling in uncharted waters, given what's going on. We were also curious to understand, well, okay, with all this change, had consumer and stakeholder expectations changed? And you can see that nearly everybody thought that expectations had changed over the past few years, which is interesting, but more interesting would be, well, in what ways have they changed? So we asked, in what ways do you think consumers and stakeholders' expectations have changed over the past few years? And again, they could say whatever they like, and you can see that you have nearly 4 in 10, 39% saying that what people expect today is purpose, but purpose with proof. So you can say you have a purpose beyond profit, but show me the evidence of that. So there's that expectation. Another expectation that was very important was that people expected from companies and brands instant responses. So for example, if you have a complaint about how you were treated by a brand, you would expect them to respond, one person said, in 15 minutes. And if you didn't respond in 15 minutes, then they would be on Twitter or Facebook saying something very negative about the brand. So consumers' expectations were very high. Another change was that there was a greater expectation of transparency from brands. They needed to be very open with consumers. And I did another piece of research just earlier this year in Germany and the UK with millennials and Gen Z. And I can tell you that at the top of their list of expectations of brands was transparency. So it's still very relevant today for consumers. What they also wanted was brands and companies to provide leadership and reassurance, as well as authenticity and a sense of ethics. So you can kind of sense that this, we saw in the earlier slide, loss of trust in traditional institutions with a gap that needs to be filled by business. So we also, another quote from a participant in Italy about consumers and stakeholders. They're more aware of their power. They have access to more information and expect to be treated better. They are active and not passive. They want to be involved in the process. And you'll see as we go through in a couple more slides, in terms of being involved in the process, consumers and stakeholders expect a seat at the table. So when a company, a brand is developing policies, campaigns, new processes, their corporate narrative, they want to be involved in that. They expect, if you want their support, they expect you to invite them in to be part of the process. That's, I think, very important. So the next section is a quick look at, well, what's the impact of radical uncertainty on communicators? How do they see it? And the first thing to keep in mind is that they see an impact. So 7 in 10, 71% of the people we spoke to said that radical uncertainty has had a great deal or some impact on them and their team's work. So especially in the UK, where we had 82%, about half in Italy and the Benelux, but still half or more saying that radical uncertainty was having an impact on their work. So the next logical question would be, in what ways? So, but first of all, a quote from Pierre Gode, who used to be the head of communications and on the board at HSBC. And I think this won't be a surprise to you. I think this is something we all experience. How do you communicate and reach people today? It's very hard. The old days were simpler, very structured. Now people carry their personal lives in their pockets. We're competing for their attention all the time. And one of the questions I'm curious to explore when we have the discussion is, do you feel that consumers and stakeholders during this crisis are difficult to get their attention, or is it less difficult to get their attention now than before? Just a question for you. So we asked communicators, in what ways has radical uncertainty impacted you and your team's work? And it's had, in some ways, quite a negative impact in one sense, especially, where they feel much more pressure. They feel like they have to respond quicker, that there's constant change, and they always have to be on guard. They have to be on 24/7, which means that they're more reactive. Which isn't good if you want to be strategic. It means that they don't have the opportunity to be strategic. They have to just kind of react to things as they come in, and it's just very reactive. Another big impact has been that it's harder to get through to their audiences. So it's more difficult to communicate, engage with stakeholders and consumers. And we also saw that 1 in 5 were using the opportunity to restructure their functions, add additional skills, bringing in new tools, using new channels, and adopting metrics to measure what they're doing. So they saw this radical uncertainty as an opportunity to upskill and do things in a different way. You can also see that there's 15% who say that they were listening and bringing the outside world in, which I think is really important. And you'll see it becomes more important in a minute. So the next quick section is just looking at what are they doing specifically to adapt to the change. And so we asked, in a very broad sense, what are the best ways to be credible, relevant, and compelling with consumers and stakeholders today, given the communications environment we're in? And you can see, first of all, 2 things are at the top of the list. One, let me move this a little bit. 2 and 3, 64% say that you really have to have a clear sense of your values as an organization. You need to know what you stand for, and then you need to live by that. So you need to be consistent. You need to have values and then be consistent with that. The number 2 thing is to have really good content that's not only factual, but human, and employs a human storytelling approach, and also make sure the language is not corporate, not just kind of jargony or corporate speak. The other 3 things in the list are actually building blocks of those 2 values and content. So for example, transparency and openness is very important to have if you're going to be able to show your values to the outside world. Listening, bringing the outside world in to have a dialogue and to co-create is important to develop content that's going to resonate with those audiences. And finally, aligning your words and behavior is very important if you want to be consistent in telling your story so that your story matches your actions. I mean, we all know that a really big problem occurs when there's a disconnect between what we're doing as an organization and what people experience. So then we asked specifically, what is your organization doing to build trust and support among your audiences in the current communication environment? And you can see again, people are most likely to be involved in a deeper dialogue with their audiences. They want to listen more. They want to make sure that their words and behaviors are aligned, and they want to do more storytelling. They feel that that's the best way to be relevant and engage. They're also developing a social purpose narrative to tell their social purpose story, using social media more, being more open and transparent, and ensuring they're more aligned, internally aligned, so doing internal engagement. And one of the things that came out in some of the other parts of the research that's not in the presentation is there was an increasing focus in 2018 with internal comms versus external comms. There was a real big focus with a lot of the big companies on ensuring that their internal audiences were lined up to tell the same story. So then we wanted to understand from a list of different things that organizations could be doing, what did they think was most likely to be important in building trust and support among their audiences. And 5 things jump out at the top of the list with 9 and 10 or more. 1, being transparent, really important. 8 and 10 say very important. Creating content that's relevant. So really, very important to listen to be able to do that. 3, meeting the expectations of their audiences. So doing what they say what the audiences expect them to do. Having a strong culture. So knowing who you are and building that through the organization, and consistently doing and saying the same thing as an organization. You can see they're also, excuse me, let me just move this again for a second. You can see they're also creating a social purpose narrative, updating their vision and values, etc. And we also were very interested to understand the degree to which organizations were taking positions on social issues, because there's a big conversation about that in the UK especially, where there is a sense among corporate communicators that, yes, we should be taking positions on social issues more and more because there's an expectation that we do it. And you can see not as much as maybe we thought. And then, so what we wanted to do next was explore very quickly. We'll get into it in a second, but this quote from Trod Neptune at Lenovo is helpful to understand when and where you might want to engage in corporate activism. So purpose as marketing rather than authentic outreach, purpose for purpose sake, is not credible. It needs to be linked to the business, which I totally agree with. And in terms of corporate activism, you need to have a strong point of view on where you stand. If not, you get pulled in all kinds of directions, which you may or may not agree with, but I think is an important thing to consider. We wanted to know from a list of possible things that organizations could stand up and take a position on, which ones were they more likely to do that on. And you can see from the question was, how likely do you think it is that your organization would voice a position on each of the following issues? And you can see they're much more likely to say things that they would stand up for diversity and inclusion, take a position on gender equality or climate change than on LGBTQ, immigration, or Me Too movement. So you can see there's a clear divide in how people are talking and thinking and talking about these issues that are increasingly expectations of our stakeholders. I mean, it used to be the case for a company like a Coca-Cola, for example. They would need to do philanthropy or maybe engagement in the community to make sure they left the water supply cleaner than when they got there. So you were expected to kind of, do the right thing, but now you're actually expected more and more to share the values of your audiences, consumers. And as I mentioned earlier, the research with Gen Z and millennials, and I can tell you, like, solid majorities over and over expect companies to share their values, especially companies that want them to work for them. So if you're wanting to attract millennials or Gen Z as employees, you should keep in mind that they're they consider having shared values on these kinds of issues very important for them, as well as obviously good pay and benefits, but it's definitely a factor for them. And finally, we asked if you could ask your leadership for one thing and get it, what would it be? And you can see 38% want more budget and resources. They just want, we want to do more. So we need more resources to do that. And then also they want leadership, which I think is fascinating. 29% say, we just want our leaders to lead, provide strategy, give us a vision and values, help us stand up, have a sense of purpose, and a variety of other things, which you can see in the report later. So the last bit here is looking at the idea of a culture of purpose, and I'll go through this very quickly and we can discuss it more if you like. But with all this change that's going on and all the uncertainty, there was, how do you deal with it? And in looking at all of the data that we had in total, all of the different IDIs, in-depth interviews, all the research, it was clear that several things popped out as really important, and that using them to build a culture of purpose could be an antidote to dealing with some of these issues. and also allow you to respond quicker to things like COVID-19 in a way that is easier for you because you understand yourself really well. So what are the 7 elements of a culture of purpose? The first one is to have clear values and a sense of purpose. Really understand who you are as an organization beyond profit. What do you stand for? What are your values? And I think that by knowing yourself, it's easier to be yourself in a time of crisis, or to understand what kinds of issues are we willing to stand up on and take a position. 2, critical leadership support. If you don't have a CEO that is going to support doing this, it's not going to happen. So you need leaders that lead and give their time as well as resources to delivering purpose. 3, transparency. Yes, it's important that IP, intellectual property, is still protected, but it's also really important that you be as open and human and humble as possible with your information, to just to share it, and to be willing to be open in times of crisis so that people aren't left with having to guess what you're going to do or say. 4, listen and co-create. We've talked about this several times in the presentation. There is an expectation that you bring people in when you're doing things. It's just you can't do it in a vacuum anymore and just kind of broadcast it out. People want you to bring them in and have a discussion about it. And the result, I think, and I've seen it personally, is you get better messages, better policies, and more support. 5 rather, alignment and consistency. Let me bring this over here for a second. Today, everything and everybody communicates. So making sure that the people inside the organization understand what the strategy is, what the message is, and how they should talk about it in a very simple way, straightforward way, in a human way, is critical today. So people expect and need internal audiences to understand and deliver the message as well. So being aligned and consistent between internal and external, what you're saying and what you're doing, is very important. 6, being data-driven. And this occurs in 2 ways. 1, social media listening. So understanding that there are a variety of conversations going on social media that affect your organization, and listening to those conversations and taking that information and using it to engage more effectively, communicate more effectively. And 2, proactive opinion research to understand what people expect from you, how they might react if you do this or that, and to understand the degree to which people see you delivering your purpose. Are we, do people see us doing what we say we're going to do? And finally, and what I think is most important, is being an advocate. So a lot of times when you talk to your clients or companies, organizations, they say, we want our employees to be ambassadors for us, for the organization, or we want our consumers to be ambassadors or tell our story. I honestly think it's the other way around. You need to think of yourself as an ambassador or an advocate for your stakeholders and consumers, and what they want and what they believe. And it's just the norm these days, so that you are actively pursuing their agenda as well as your agenda. And I think if you do that, you're much more likely to get their trust and support. And just to close on one final quote from Hans Koloman, who's the head of communications at KPN, the telecom company in the Netherlands. Today, you have to have a strong sense of who you are as a company. Then you can be vulnerable. Everything can change around you, or around me, but I won't change. My character, my values stay the same. Radical uncertainty requires an understanding of who you are, your culture and purpose, and radical transparency. And with that, I would just like to open it up or hand it back to you, Mika, to navigate the conversation.
Thanks, Phil, a lot. I can now read few questions just to kick off the discussions, and then people can raise their hands virtually. So everyone can get the word. So the questions were what he will suggest. Should the company inform proactively partners and public about the COVID situation and influence on business and impact, or should it be reactive, exposed answer? And the second question is what he will propose if the company internal rules are strict and there is a restriction to communicate any sort of benefit related to Corona. We are not allowed to even promote some good examples how our solutions help to improve situation with pandemic.
I think on the first one, I wish we could ask everybody to vote on that, because I think it's it would be much more interesting and relevant to hear what you think in terms of should we proactively communicate with our partners in the supply chain. I mean, I would imagine that you are anyway. So I mean, I think it's interesting because you have two parts to that question. One, should we proactively communicate with our supply chain? Two, what about restrictions on our proactive communication of what we're doing externally to the world? How do we deal with that? I think that internal audiences, obviously, yes, proactively as much as possible, because everybody's worried. We're all worried. I think yes, short answer, and be curious if anyone disagrees with that one. And then in terms of communicating externally, it's really sensitive right now and very easy to get it wrong. There were several examples, more examples, I think, in the UK and the US where companies were getting it wrong than getting it right and had to kind of come back. Elon Musk, for example, from Tesla, initially was saying, oh, we're going to keep our factories open and we think we're a necessary business that needs to keep working. And then he got slammed on Twitter and backtracked and then said, look, okay, we're not going to do that. We're going to give 5,000 respirators to hospitals in LA, So I think it's a very sensitive thing and you need to be very careful. And if you have restrictions, you have restrictions and you should abide by them. But it doesn't mean you can't do things and then talk about it later as well. So behavior, and maybe other people will pick up your behavior what you're doing and share it as a third party, So shouldn't stop your behavior. It may inhibit your communication for a little while until things are calmer. But I'd be curious what other people think. Anyone?
Maybe it's clear.
Okay.
So maybe I can also read another question.
Absolutely.
Is searching for new online platforms and new communication approaches like video streaming and changing the tone of voice during the time of crisis efficient?
So is using like new platforms like Zoom or whatever? I didn't quite understand the question. One more time.
Is searching for new online platforms, maybe they meant Zoom and so on, and new communication approaches like changing the tone of voice. I think that or I ask, is there anyone who asked the question among us right now?
Who wants to speak?
I mean that the question was about that the companies have to change their strategies, maybe even the tone of voice and so on, and they have to communicate online and even change the communication approaches. So
I think we're going through a really big change in terms of, and it's a good one in terms of, I mean, nobody can fly, nobody can go to meetings. So we've all gone to situations like what we're doing today, where we're using digital platforms to reach out to people. And that's a good thing. And other platforms like Twitter, or Facebook, or Snapchat, or TikTok, or whatever, I think you have to, and some of them are probably, it's going to be different for every company. Every organization is going to have a different mix. I can tell you from the research we did with millennials and Gen Z that they're not on LinkedIn, for example, that they're very much on other social media channels like Instagram, Snapchat, and WhatsApp, for example. They're just, the people under 40 are much more, and Facebook. So people say between 26 and 40 are on Facebook still. People under 24 aren't really on Facebook. So they're on other channels. So that's one aspect of it. In terms of tone of voice, I think everybody expects a very serious tone of voice right now. There's some companies can get away with humor. I think it's a very tough, and most companies should stay away from humor, I think, at this point in time, and just be very serious, and matter direct. I think people just expect you to be honest and open, and direct.
Mm-hmm.
Just
thank you.
Sure.
Also, we can see another question here on chat from Carolina. Can you see it, Phil?
Let's see. Let me open this. Is it here? Yeah.
Does it mean that you do not encourage?
Oh no, that's a very good question. It's great. It's how you talk about, like, if we're talking about what I was saying in the presentation, it's great to have employees as ambassadors, but it's how you kind of engage in that relationship. So it's finding out what is it that they would feel comfortable talking about. It might not be what you think it is. They might find, a lot of companies just try to push their message to employees and say, push it out, on your social media channels. You might want to bring them in and have a conversation. And because of things like Zoom, it's a lot easier to do that. There are other platforms where it's more anonymous, where people can give their opinion and say, well, I think, that's not appropriate. I think this would be appropriate. And I would be willing to share that. Another question that we did ask in the survey with millennials and Gen Z was, would you be willing to share content from your employer if the CEO asked you to, if it aligned with your values, and if it didn't align with your values? They're much more likely to want to do it if it aligns with their values than anything else. So that's why it's important to listen. Doesn't mean you shouldn't want to bring them in as an ambassador and to share content. It's just how you do it, I think. I think the group chat thing's great. Let's use that.
Also, the other question was, when is the right time to change the topic from CSR, like we help this situation, and to start offering normal products like traveling or gastronomy and just normal things from
I have, the only answer I have is probably the same one you have, which is probably when things calm down. I think we have to this is such uncharted territory for all of us. It's impossible. I think to manage risk, you have to kind of just follow what's going on. Obviously some brands are going to step up sooner, but it depends on your tolerance for risk. Social media reaction could be supportive or could be very negative. So you have to kind of think about what's our organization's tolerance for risk in that regard. I honestly, one thing that people have been talking about is, well, we've changed our behavior and some of our thinking because of this crisis. Is it permanent or is it only temporary? Are we going to go back to the way we were when this is all over? And my own view is, I think a lot of behaviors are going to revert back to the way they were before. But some things are going to be I think will stay the same. For example, what we're doing here, people, I mean, we're all getting very comfortable with this. So it's going to be very easy for organizations to say, look, as the teams need to communicate together online rather than having meetings and where you have to travel. But I think just to go back to the question, I just think you're going to have to kind of wait and see. Hope that answers it for you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, everyone else.
Well, if I may, Miss Pavel.
Hey, Pavel.
Hey, I'm back. Sorry for the disconnection, but I'm back. So sorry for the beginning. But now I have a very special question on you because it is related to your presentation directly, and it's about brand activism. I believe that now we see plenty of brand activism activities around of us, and I right now remember what Paul Holmes said last year in Cannes, and he said something like, well, now it's a turn for brand activism, but I'm really curious who or which type of agencies will be invited to the table to talk about it with companies and with like clients. And he suggested that it will be probably more creative agencies, like advertising agencies, content agencies, but not so much PR agencies, because they do not have, let's say, some trust feeling in terms of they will be able to deliver that brand promise. What do you think about this?
I think he's right generally. That most, well, especially if you're talking about like the big PR companies, like, you know, the Edelmans, the Weber Shandwicks, etc. They're, you know, they have I'm sure they have an offering that does this, but I think where PR companies have an opportunity is in the boutique space. So there are a variety of boutique agencies now that focus exclusively on purpose or on you know, campaigns or narrative development. And I think the way, especially in the UK, even big brands are looking at smaller agencies for support and on those kinds of unique challenges on how do we deal with corporate activism. Or another thing that I see a lot of is where you're asking your agencies to work together on the marketing comms and the PR side, you know, like the corporate comms side. So just they expect you to play well with each other and not be trying to get each other's budgets, but to actually work on solving these complex problems for the organization.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Oh, Phil, can you see another question on chat?
That's a good question. I mean, I think also, which we didn't talk about, is culture.
And sorry, could you please repeat the question for all?
Oh, sure. I'm sorry. It says,
yeah, thank you.
You said that customers expect a serious tone of voice, but isn't there a big potential to offer people through humor, a small relief, a distraction from a pandemic situation whilst everybody is really serious? Two things. One, culture. I think every country has a somewhat different culture in terms of what's tolerance for humor in serious situations, very much so, and culture of the organization or the brand in terms of what they can get away with. Like I'm thinking of like Red Bull, for example, would be much more likely to be able to do something like that than a Unilever or, you know, a car company, for example. They had to. So I think humor it really depends. I would be very cautious if I was a traditional FMCG company. But again, I don't know. What do you have companies in the Czech Republic been using humor at all yet?
Very limited.
What's the reaction been?
I guess, you know, we are a nation who is famous for very high affinity to humor. But now I guess people rather show their helping face, and as well as companies, because it is now more important to help those who need the help, and rather not to make fun of that. Maybe time for making fun will come after summer holiday or later.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And depending on where you are in the curve, you know, so definitely agree with you.
May I have one more question, please?
Sure.
I also very appreciate that in your presentation was mentioned that really people seek now for leadership and like really strategy, values, and it's all about trust. How do you think that, or how do you perceive that this balance between declaration of leadership and the real leadership of CEOs and board members, especially in corporations, because it's not so obvious that CEO must be great leader?
I guess it depends on if you're talking about towards internally facing or externally facing.
Especially, you know? Internally facing.
Did you see, did people see the little video from the CEO of Marriott? That kind of went viral like a week ago. If you haven't seen it, I would look for that. It's like a 3 or 4 minute video by the CEO of Marriott company, the hotel chain, where he talks about what's going on, and he gets emotional during the video. It's very powerful, and he received a lot of praise because he got it right. You know, he was giving facts, so it was a factual message about what the company was doing and how it was going to affect employees in the business, but he was human, very, very human. And that worked really well. So I think if you don't step up, I think CEOs need to step up and do, you know, this is their moment internally. Externally, not so sure, because most people don't know who the CEO of most companies is. So it would just, I mean, I think the story could be told in a different way about what we're doing as an organization. But it depends on the visibility of the CEO. There was a question from Ava.
Yeah, I can read it. Fell back to the previous question and answer. Do you think it's a good idea to communicate CSR activities related to coronavirus right now instead of brand comms? I'm not sure it's a good strategy.
I share that view. I think, again, everything depends on the brand and what your profile is and who your audience is. There's a great book, you may be aware of it, called The Brand Flip by Marty Neumeier. He's a brand person from California. It's just, if you Google The Brand Flip, but his idea is basically that the relationship between the brand and our audiences has changed, where before a company controlled how its brand was defined and communicated and how almost interpreted, that it's reversed. And now the audience owns the brand. And the audience is like a tribe. So it's not everybody. It's like a certain segment of the population who supports you very much. And it could be both buying your product, but also supporting you on social media. Nike's a great example. You know, Nike has a really big tribe. And you might have remembered last year, 2 years ago now, there was the big issue in the US with the football players taking a knee and not standing up for the Pledge of Allegiance or the national anthem at the beginning of games. Big issue. And Nike took it on and really alienated a lot of people in the US, and their stock price went down by 1/3, but their sales also shot up because they knew who their tribe was, which was urban shoppers, and urban shoppers loved it. So again, it's whatever you do, whether it's focusing on brand comms or coronavirus CSR activities, you have to know your tribe. Who is it that matters to us? And even if we get negative pushback on social media from someone, they might not matter to us. But if you don't understand who your audience is, who your tribes are, and they could be more than one, they might be, you know, young families, they might be older, retired people, I don't know. But if you don't know who your tribe is, it's a huge risk. But if you do know who your tribe is, you're managing that risk in a way that you might think, okay, well, it's worth the risk actually, because our tribe, you know, maybe you test it out a little bit through, you can do A/B testing on social media, or, you know, some quick online focus groups or whatever. But I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying be careful and know your tribe. We still have about 10 minutes. I'd love more questions or people's comments. You know, I have a question, and anybody can jump in, but do you think that purpose still matters? You know, now that we're going through COVID-19, is it more, with all crisis communications, purpose not that important right now? Or is purpose actually more important, or the same? Does anybody have a view?
Can I join out? Magdalena from Unilever, Czech Republic. Please. And Slovakia. So we are a very purpose-led company. Let's say every brand we have actually has purpose, or we are trying to create purpose for that brand. And now we, as a corporation, for example, see even bigger impact of purpose, because now you can really show your power and your ability to really help the community. So I think that it's even much more important to show your power externally in this area and to help the communities where you can. And also it's very important internally that employees can see that company really do what it says. So I think that is even much more important.
Absolutely, I agree totally. Anyone else have a perspective on that? Okay, so here's a question for the corporate communicators. How well do you think your organization, that's probably not a political question. I was going to ask, how well do you think your organization has communicated during the crisis so far? That's good job, okay job, not so good job. And what do you wish they had done better? If anybody wants to take that one on. And if not, another question is, do you think people's expectations of brands have changed because of the coronavirus crisis? Do you feel like people's expectations of you have changed? Anybody? Or I'll take another question.
Well, here's Pavel again. From my perspective, long story short, it's like the coronavirus issue is, from my point of view, a kind of disruptive moment, which shows them how really brands are working and communicating or before, if they are consistent. Because from my perspective, there is really necessary that in communication there is always present some content in some context with consistency. And when there is no consistency, so nothing will help.
Definitely, very, very true.
I actually agree with Pavel because I think now the companies can show if they really live the purpose. So it's now much more important to do and then to say. I think people are now very carefully watching how different brands are behaving. And they are putting things in context, depending on what the brand is actually doing and what it has been saying until now. And they are comparing how it actually all fits together, if it fits.
Yeah, if it fits. That's a great, if it fits. So like there's a company, a supermarket chain in the UK called Iceland, and it's
Yeah.
very much at the bottom end of the market. It's, you know, you have M&S and Waitrose up here, Iceland's down here, but they have a really good, they're really good at purpose. And what they did was they were the first supermarket chain to say, we are going to open from 9 to 10 in the morning only for seniors, older people, because, you know, we want them to shop in peace. And they got tons of great publicity for it. On the other end of the spectrum, Shop Direct, which is a sporting goods chain in the UK, their CEO, his initial thing was, we're not closing, we're staying open because sports equipment is an essential good. You know, people need sporting equipment. And he got torn apart, you know, but, you know, Iceland stood up on something that was relevant to their core offer, and it worked really well. Okay, to the question, I'm going to just type it in there, I think, because if I can, does that work? Yep. So it was the CEO of Marriott. Video on, it should be on Twitter, or just if you Google it, it should come through.
Can I speak?
Sure.
Now, hi, I'm Václav. I'm a PR consultant, and I have my own agency. I now listen to this entire discussion, and I can hear there that we are somehow trying to define some recipes or some solutions, some strategies. And we talk that companies can show, the companies can plan, companies can communicate. I think that this is not the case, because the crisis situation is first of all uncertain, is rapidly changing. So I would say that now the real character of people and character of organizations just shows itself. So people behave somehow, behave spontaneously, and sometimes it is positive what is uncovered, and sometimes it is negative. So I think that this crisis will be a big lesson learned for us communicators, and the image sometimes created by some corporate speak, corporate phrases will uncover, and the real characters will be seen, and it will be and people, the stakeholders will remember that. So it will be very interesting to see how the reputation will change after this period, and what will it make with relations and images and sales in the post-crisis times.
I agree with you 100% that it is like it's shining a spotlight on character, and I think it reinforces the idea of one of our responsibilities is to help our organizations build this culture of purpose where we understand what is it we stand for, you know, what is it that we believe in and will stand up for as a group, so that no matter what situation comes out, your character will shine through, which is, you know, we care about this, we care about that. And everybody from the CEO down to the frontline workers should know that, and, you know, and live it. So, but on your other point about, well, let's see if consumers still punish companies that, you know, misbehaved during the crisis. Because my own fear is that people have short-term memories when it comes to the products that they want to buy, you know, so that they, like when the Rana Plaza situation happened, where people died because of the poor working conditions for making garments, people still bought from the Primark in the UK, even though they were one of the worst offenders. So I wish that people would punish companies, and they say they will punish companies, but I think they have short-term memories in that regard. I know we're running out of time, and I just want to say there's in addition to the PowerPoint, there's a full report that's more like an A4 report, a pamphlet that I'll send the link to Mika so you can share it with everybody. And it's a much more it's the full report.
So thank you very much, Phil.
It's
Any
my
more
pleasure.
question?
Any final questions?
Any more question, guys? Přátelé, máme poslední 2 minutky.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, guys. I will just quickly switch to the Czech. Díky moc, přátelé. Děkuji za to, že jste se zúčastnili prvního webináře PR Klubu a těším se na další téma toho dalšího. Připravujeme a mělo by být o interní komunikaci, ale pokud máte nějaké další nápady, co bychom pro vás jako komunitu mohli udělat, tak sem s tím napište Míše na ředitelka@prklub.cz, napište mě na pavel.vlček@prklub.cz. Budeme moc rádi, díky, že jste tady byli s náma, díky Philovi a mějte se moc krásně.
Thank you, Phil.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Thank you, bye-bye.